Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome back to another Facebook Live show here on COSA TV. Greg Blanchard, great to have you with us. Hope you've had a wonderful Sunday to this point, and we have a very entertaining show coming up for you tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Special guests will be joining me in just a moment. Before we get started, I want to remind you of a couple of items. We have the COSA and Trot Magazine Fantasy Stable set to go for 2020, and again, still time to submit your stables for that. Visit the Standardbred Canada website for all the information you need. Absolutely free to play along. And the top prize in that is going to be a night out for a group of 25 at the luxurious VIP suite at Mohawk Park. A group of 25. They get betting vouchers, a food voucher as well. Total prize value at close to $4,000. And again, absolutely free to play. It's a lot of fun and a great way to really follow along with the Ontario Sire Stakes program this season. So make sure to stop by the Standardbred Canada website and fill out your stable for the 2020 COSA Fantasy Stable. We've got a poll question before we meet our guests this evening. And our question tonight is on a Little Brown Jug theme, wondering who turned in the greatest Little Brown Jug performance of all time. And we came up with three options: Life Sign from back in 1993, Shadow Play, that courageous effort back in 2008, and Wiggle It, Jiggle It more recently from 2015. Or perhaps you think it was another horse who turned in the greatest performance in Little Brown Jug history. And whatever you think, make sure to leave your comments for us. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions for our guests tonight as well, and we have some trivia to work in throughout the show as well. So going to be a lot of fun, as mentioned. And time now to meet our special guests this evening. And a gentleman who will be joining us tonight on the show is certainly a living legend of the sport of harness racing. He is the one and only Roger Houston, and what a career it has been for him. And we'll take a look back at just some of the amazing accomplishments that Roger's had over the course of his career. To this point, he's called more than 188,000 races at 146 different racetracks or venues, and included there 52 consecutive Little Brown Jugs. Of course, the Jug, the premier race for pacers in the sport, and Roger has had the privilege of calling that race for 52 consecutive years. And we welcome Roger and our other special guests joining us tonight, a couple of good friends of mine, colleagues Jason Settlemore, the COO of the Meadowlands Racetrack, Vice President, I believe is your title at Tioga and Vernon as well, and Greg Gangle, Racing Manager right here in London. And we've worked together in the past at Woodbine Entertainment and, of course, here at Western Fair. Gentlemen, great to have you with us, and hope you're all doing well.
Pleasure
it's
to be
great
here.
to be here tonight.
Awesome. Well, everybody looks like they're doing well. We're all growing a little bit here, except Mr. Gangle. Not sure if he's trying or not, but he's a little bit younger
He's
than
not even
the rest of
shaving
them.
yet. He's not even shaving yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason's from his locale outside in New Jersey getting some sun. Maybe we'll start with you, Jason. Again, you're down in the area that really was one of the hardest hits in, well, not only North America, really in the world. What's the mood like there now? Are we starting to see some signs of optimism there like we've seen elsewhere?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some signs of optimism. We went to the New Jersey Racing Commission and also the New York Gaming Commission as well with applications and trying to get back up and going as quickly as the middle of May here. So there's some optimism. And as I travel around in my car, I'm starting to see more and more people on the roads in New Jersey. So there's some optimism there. The governor here in New Jersey, he had shut down everything, including the state parks. And last week, at the end of the week, he did open the state parks back up, of course, with the social distancing still in effect. And he also started opening up a couple of other smaller items to see how, I guess, we can handle it and go from there. But he's going to make a decision at the beginning of this coming week, Governor Murphy, on the rest of the school year here in New Jersey. As we all know, New York and Pennsylvania have all canceled their school and for online teaching until next year, until the fall. So I would suspect that Governor Murphy will go that way, but we'll wait to hear what he has to say. He said he would make that announcement on Monday or Tuesday. But yes, indeed, there is some optimism. There are people starting to travel around a little bit more. It's a new world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, for sure. And as part of a team that operates racetracks in two different states, New York, New Jersey, maybe just a quick thought on how it is dealing with two different sets of governments, two different regulators. But I understand some of the states in the area are kind of working together. Are you finding it's pretty consistent in trying to deal with the entities in both New York and New Jersey?
Yeah, it's pretty consistent. I mean, everybody wants what's best for the public, and that's safety. Um, and of course, that's the side that we've always erred on. We closed our property at the Meadowlands Friday, March the 13th. Of course, Tioga and Vernon had not started racing yet, but we closed on Friday, March the 13th, and haven't raced since then. So I'm a little stir crazy. But working with both sets of regulators throughout the state of New York and also in New Jersey, they've been very, very amenable in working with us. And I think that there is a little bit of optimism that maybe we can get started again sometime here over the next few weeks with the social distancing in place and no fans in the stands. So, which is, that's the
Yeah.
hardest thing for me, is because I enjoy interacting with the people. And, when you're quarantined in a home and not really be able to go out and see people and interact with people like you always do, that's the toughest part for me. I certainly miss all of our employees and our horsemen and all the customers as well.
Yeah. Greg, I'm sure you would echo that sentiment. And it was late March when we had to pause racing here. And I know, us along with Flamborough Downs, Mohawk Park, really tried to do everything we could to sustain racing as long as we could, realizing that when the plug got pulled, ultimately, it wasn't going to be just for a few days. It was likely going to be a long-term thing. But talk about some of the protocols that were in place at the end of those last couple of programs here in London before racing got shut down, and things that are likely going to have to be in place when we start back.
Yeah, absolutely. The one benefit that we had was, our good friends at Woodbine Mohawk Park, us and Flamborough Downs were in constant communication with Jim Lawson, Jessica Buckley, Bill McClinchy, and their team to talk about what they were doing and how we can follow suit with implications and make it suitable for our racetracks. So, checking everybody's temperature when they first come into the gate. There's a questionnaire about, have you been outside of the country? Anybody with symptoms of cough or fever, flu, anything like that. So there's a long list of questions. We wanted to make sure there was plenty of hand sanitizers, extra security, and things like that. We unfortunately had to pull the plug. It's just the subject of the COVID-19. But when we get back to things, we recently submitted and were asked to submit more of a report as to what each racetrack in Ontario can do and what they can implement, such as social distancing and things like that, to get things underway. So every track is relatively different in terms of what they can do and their setup. So we quickly turned that around back to Ontario Racing, and like everybody else right now, we're just at a standstill. So obviously we're expecting to come back with no spectators, participants only. Not going to see owners or anybody of that nature in the paddock, other than trainers and drivers, probably one horse per person, or one person per horse, I should say, and just limit to the amount of people inside our facility. But, it's subject of the environment of what's going on. To Jason's point, he mentioned state parks are open. No provincial park is open right now in Ontario. So maybe New Jersey, New York is slightly ahead of us. I'm not quite sure, but I think the bottom line is when the government gives you the go ahead, you want to race tomorrow. So we want to take every precaution and, be on our heels, or on our toes, I should say.
Yeah, and if there is good news, the fact that we had a lot of those things in place before racing ceased, so
Yeah.
we'll be obviously ready to react quickly when the word comes, and getting some positive signs from provincial government here in recent days as well. and for that matter, in many jurisdictions around North America, that things are certainly going in the right direction. So we're all optimistic, no question. Just a quick word as well, Greg, on your trip. Now, the timing was very interesting for you because you were on a family trip to Australia. Your better half, Anna, of course, from down under, and you were back there for a visit, and you had to do the whole quarantine thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was timing wasn't the best, to say the least. We left the early part of March, and we got back March 24th. Yeah, it was supposed to be the 25th, but they jammed everybody on one flight to get us home. That's a whole other story. We spent about 6 hours on the airline, or on the phone with the airline, just getting everything arranged. And one crazy thing about even our flight back with our two kids was we had a connecting flight in Los Angeles to bring us to Toronto. And if your connecting flight did not leave the same day, you had to quarantine in Los Angeles for 14 days. Ooh. So if that flight was canceled or anything like that, so we, wow. It was pretty much roll the dice. So fortunate enough, we were able to get back home. But if we were delayed or anything like that, we're stuck in LA for 14 days. So when we got home, you know what, you just had to adapt. We knew well ahead what we were getting ourselves into when we arrived home. And the kids were really good. It was front yard, backyard, front yard, backyard. I've never been bossed around so many times in 14 days. But you know what? It is what it is. To be honest, looking back now, I've never spent so much time with my kids. So, it's a great feeling to in that point to be involved in this time. But at the same time, happy to get back to somewhat of reality, getting outside that 14-day quarantine and actually being able to go get some groceries for a change.
Yeah, crazy times, and I think I know that ringtone. Yeah. It sounds like the Delaware County Fairgrounds to me, and that's perfect timing, Roger. We want to talk to you, and we read a really interesting article last night you did with Standardbred Canada, and talked about the possibility of calling a Little Brown Jug or hosting a Little Brown Jug event with no fans. I mean, you could never imagine that in your wildest dreams, right?
Never. I mean, record attendance 56,000. We've been right around 40 to 45,000 for a number of years now, and to think that you'd only have people that. Excuse me. Anyway. It's almost like a nightmare to think about it. They covered when they wanted that article and everything, and so I didn't really have a lot of time to think about it or anything like that. But it is what it is, and the governor of Ohio made the statement a couple weeks ago in a press conference that there would be no Major League Baseball in Ohio this year, maybe in Arizona and Florida. And somebody else asked something about Ohio State football, and he says, I can't imagine 90,000 people in the shoe at the Ohio State on a Saturday afternoon. And, well, Delaware is only 25 miles north of the shoe, and I guess that means he can't imagine 45,000 people at Delaware, Ohio either. But hopefully maybe things will change in the next 3 or 4 months, and maybe, good Lord willing, creek don't get too high. I'll tell you one thing, that creek's getting pretty high lately, but maybe we'll have a normal Little Brown Jug. It'd be nice anyway.
Well, when you talk Little Brown Jug, you can't talk Little Brown Jug without talking Roger Houston, and vice versa. The two just simply go together. And Roger, take us back. When did you first start calling the Jug? And maybe a quick thought on how that all came about.
Charlie Hinkle had been calling the Jug, and he got a chance to go out and do professional basketball for an ABA team in Los Angeles for Pat Boone. And he told Hank Thompson at the Adios that he wasn't going to be there for the Jug. And Corwin Nixon says, well, there's a young kid over in Xenia that you might get a hold of. He'd be all right. He does county fairs and things like that. So Hank called me at 10 o'clock at night, and I got the job of announcing, and he said, you won't be able to call the jug because I was hard up. No, I won't say a hard up. That's a bad choice of words. He said, Stan Bergstein offered to call the jug, but we want you to do Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I'm sure Stan will let you call some races. So I did not call the jug in '67, but in 1968, it was all mine, and it's been that way ever since. And it's defined my entire life, I think, when it comes to harness racing. It was a great experience, and it is a great experience, and I live for it. As soon as it's over, I can't wait till the next year.
Yeah. I see Jason shaking his head, an Ohio boy himself, and certainly knows what that's all about. We're going to go back here, and tonight we'll have a look at a few of your favorite jugs. We've all sort of had our hand in picking out a couple, and Roger, one that's still near and dear to your heart. 49 years ago, one of the most epic Little Brown Jug days in history. It was the day where everybody was coming to simply watch Albatross do his thing and add a Little Brown Jug title to his trophy case. But Hervé Filion and a colt named Nansdaman had other ideas.
Yeah, it's no doubt about it. But the story actually started in Detroit the week before. Stanley Dancer told a member of the press that all I have to do is to Delaware, Ohio, and jog around the track to win the Little Brown Jug. And the fans in Delaware didn't like that statement. And so it didn't matter where you went. They had that headline posted all over the Delaware County Fairgrounds. And Stanley actually got booed in the post parade. And he won one heat, and Nansman won the other, and three of H.T. Luca, I think, was the other winner, and they came back for a 3-horse race off, and the rest is history. It was Nansman, and after the race, Stanley said, I'm not coming back to Delaware until I win the Little Brown Jug, and he didn't come back until 1976 when he won with Keystone Ore. He had his own way in this race. He was on top. This is his division, and Albatross, everybody thought it would be a jiggy jog, and it was a jiggy jog, but he didn't have to race in the first division anyway.
Yeah, we're getting a look at the second heat. So he barely got by Nansdaman in the first heat, and could have won it here. Yeah, this is the second heat. Hervé with the pocket trip gets up and beats him, and then it sets it up for the 3-horse race off, and there's Hervé coming back. And I found it interesting, did a little bit of reading again, just to, reacquaint myself with this day. And this horse had missed a lot of time before Jug Day. So this was really, really an epic upset.
Yeah. And the crowd, believe me, the crowd was totally behind Hervé. Now, Hervé was not going to let Dancer go, no matter what. I talked to Hervé after, and he said, if we'd had to go down the quarter a lot faster, we would have. But he says, I was not going to let Dancer control this race. He wanted to do it. Dancer took the pocket, and the rest is history. Hervé and Nansdaman win the Little Brown Jug. He pulled just past the 3 quarters and came at him, but to no avail. It was a hot final quarter, too. Big battle.
And we've seen this over the years, right, Roger? Like on that day, great horses can get beat fair and square.
Yeah, and Hervé, with his decision, going to cut it out, was the winning move, and he knew where he wanted to have Dancer be, and he put him right in the 2-hole, and that started a string that, in the history of the Little Brown Jug, and I haven't got the figure with me right now, but there's only been 2 horses win the final heat of the Little Brown Jug in the 2-hole. The others have gone from somebody off the pace or on the front end. The one other one I remember was Legal Notice, and that's a Canadian horse. John Hayes the veterinarian, was driving legal notice, and he took a 2-hole trip behind Colt 46, and he got buried alive coming to the half, never got out. And I really thought legal notice was the best horse that day, but Chris Boring had Dr. Hayes
Other
right
idea.
where he wanted.
Yeah. And Jason, great shot there of the crowd on that day, and that's the Little Brown Jug. As a young guy growing up in Ohio, when did you start to really become a fan of racing and the Little Brown Jug?
My dad was taking me to the races when I was like 5 years old over to Scioto Downs in Beulah Park, which was formerly Darby Downs in Grove City. So we were going to the races, and then in 1989, a gentleman by the name of Terry. Now you got to imagine, like Columbus, where I lived at in Newark, Ohio, and grew up. Columbus is 40 miles. It is 40 miles west of where I grew up, and then 1989, a guy by the name of Terry Holton moved in across the street on my paper route. And I asked the lady, Mrs. Mazelkoff, I said, do you know who's buying the house? And she said, yeah, a guy by the name of Terry Holton. It's like the guy that trains and drives horses at Scioto Downs. And she said, yep. And now, again, that's 40 miles from the house. And so Terry moved in, and Terry became like a father to me over the years. And it was always funny because, and I always tell this story, and I think it's hysterical. Like, everybody knew where I was at the third Thursday after Labor Day, right? And here it was, I think it was 1989. BJ Scoot was the first jug that I was at, and I haven't missed one since. And even my principals, school teachers, Mr. Marcus, Mr. Evans, Principal Evans, they all asked, for tickets from me to go to the Little Brown Jug. So they'd all be in school in Newark, Ohio, and I'd run into my principal and run into the school teachers there. When we were at the Jug, we were all skipping school to be there. So that was always funny. The Jug, there's so many memories I have of the Little Brown Jug, and it was, that place means quite a bit to me. And to be able to do the things that I have done there, and Phil Terry, I was throwing blankets in the winner's circle. And then I went from I was taking pictures for Conrad Photography from the inside when Nick's Fantasy won the Little Brown Jug. And then the year after, Phil had asked me to help out with the throwing blankets and trophy presentations there in the winner's circle. And then a couple years after that, he asked me to start handling all the simulcast work. And, and then it was Mr. Thompson came to me along with Phil several years ago now and asked me if I would be the second announcer with Roger. And, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, did anybody talk to Sam? And of course, they felt that Sam was better served on the TV program, which in hindsight is probably correct. But, it's been a dream for me, and to work there in Delaware, Ohio, much like running the Meadowlands racetrack. I had a newspaper article that was written back in 1999. And it's hanging outside of my office. And in that article, they asked me that, I was calling the races and doing the simulcast work at Scioto Downs then. They asked me, they said, what do you want to do in the future? And I said I wanted to run the Meadowlands racetrack. So, and
there you go.
Today.
Well done.
It's been quite a ride, and Roger has meant quite a bit and been there with me quite a bit. Roger's always been a mentor and somebody I've been able to lean on in tough times, and Roger has become, he's one of those guys that where anytime I ever have needed something or asked for something, and he's always there on the other end of the phone, and he picks up even if it's in the middle of the race and I didn't realize he was calling a race. He'll pick up the phone and I can hear him in the background calling races. So
yeah. Well, at least Greg and I don't feel as bad now that your school teachers aren't the only ones that ask you for tickets to the Jug.
I want to. You talk about school teachers.
Canadian guy.
The first Little Brown Jug I went to was in 1958. I was a junior in high school, and my math teacher was named Jan McPherson, who worked for Doc McMillan, a trainer in the Buckeye State. And I always skipped school to go to the jug as well. And don't you know that the very first person I ran into in Delaware in 1958 was my math teacher, Jan McPherson. And I says, "What's your excuse?" And he says, "The same as yours. We're both sick."
Classic. Well, you know it's a big
I
race,
haven't,
right?
I
It's
haven't been to Doug since BJ Scoot, and that's, I
yeah,
mean, I think Roger can tell you. I mean, you guys, you'll come down from Canada, but Roger and I both being, natives of the Buckeye State,
yeah.
and how much that race really means to us, it means quite a bit. And I look, I pray every day that we can get through this thing as not just as a country, but as a world, and we can get back to normal, because I don't think that you know I would be hard pressed to say that we would not be able to have fans in Delaware, Ohio come September. But man, that would be an absolute disaster. So
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. And I grew up in Prince Edward Island, so to me, it's really the only
Mhm,
comparable race in North America
mhm.
where, the entire province of PEI kind of shuts down for that day of the Gold Cup and Saucer, and the tourism industry and the economy around that entire week, very similar to what it is in Delaware. So. I know what you mean on that front. Roger, you've of course are synonymous with the Little Brown Jug, 52 years as mentioned, but you also had your regular day-to-day job calling at the Meadows. And let's take a look back at a big race from 1980, a colt named Storm Damage, who of
Mhm.
course had the unenviable task of chasing the great Niatros for much of the season. But on that day, he took center stage in the Adios. Can you set up that day for us and your
Well,
recollection of it?
Clint Galbraith chose not to race in the Adios, and Jerry Smith owned Storm Damage, and that was on his schedule from the get-go. And Storm Damage was driven by Joe O'Brien, who I thought was one of the greatest drivers ever in harness racing. Jigglin' Joe, they would call him and stuff. And when he was coming down the stretch, and the one thing that I remember after that, I mean, it set the world's record, 153-2 at that time. George Smallsreed, who was the top photographer in for Hoofbeats and the USTA, he got a picture of Storm Damage coming home on the world record 153-2, and this was the day before they ever had the machine gun type of cameras. I mean, you took single shots and things like that. And George captured a picture of Storm Damage coming home with Joe O'Brien, and all four hoofs were above the axle of the sulky. And George says, "I've taken thousands of pictures and I never have got a horse with all the feet flying above the axle." And Storm Damage lived up to the expectations, and he won the Adios that day, and it was a big thrill for Jerry Smith. And since Jerry had been a lifelong friend, it was a big thrill for me as well.
Okay, let's take a look back at that one now, and we'll come back and talk more in a moment.
Has been 55-4, the fastest half mile ever in the Adios. As the Jimbo trails the field at the 3/4 mark. 1:24-4, the fastest 3/4 ever in the Adios. Midway around the turn, and Storm Damage and Joe O'Brien opening up now by 4 lengths. They've got an 1/8 of a mile to pace. On the outside, just in passing, JD's back and Tyler B. It's Storm Damage and Joe O'Brien, just in passing second. It's Storm Damage and Joe O'Brien by himself. 1:53, 2/5. The fastest mile ever on a 5/8 mile track, shattering the world's record.
I think the world's record was 156. Before that, the world's record was 156. Yeah, it was.
And
But
quite
that
a
was
crop when you think about it.
well, remember Tyler B. It seemed like every week they would race, and it would be Niatros win, Storm Damage would be second, Tyler B. would be third, and thank goodness for that week, that day. Niatros wasn't there, and Storm Damage got the win.
All right, let's fast forward 4 years, same venue, Roger, and a new series for harness racing. Who could have foreseen at the time that the Breeders' Crown would become such an important part of the sport? What do you recall about the excitement around the plant that year, and especially with the hometown colt Dragon's Lair and what he did?
He was a hometown colt, and Jeff Mallett had him, and I dubbed him all year long as the horse from the meadows. And we were at Delaware, and Billy Houghton says, "Do you really think Dragon's Lair can beat Annihilator?" And I says, "Sure. Dragon's Lair going to be in his home track, and I think he'll win the Breeders' Crown." And consequently, it's what happened. There was a trainer at the Meadows by the name of Mark Goldberg, and still a trainer there. And Mark was good friends with Jeff, and he told Jeff, he says, they got 3 horses in that race, and they're going to try and work you over pretty good going away. He says, for goodness sake, put Dragon's Lair on the front end, make them take a seat, back it off a little, then out sprint them coming home, and that's exactly what he did. And it was a world's record. I think it was 154 or 154 and 1. And for many years, everybody said that was the greatest Breeders' Crown race ever, and it was the first year back in 1984.
Yeah, we had Moira
was doing the race.
Yeah, we had Moira Gary Seibel on recently, and that's a race that they picked out, and they said, yeah, you couldn't have picked a better way to start off the Breeders' Crown Series and create that excitement and create some of the great rivalries that we saw year after year. So let's take a look back at the 1984 Breeders' Crown. Once again, Dragon's Lair upending Annihilator in year 1 of the Breeders' Crown.
Marauder, Whitson's Wizard, Warm Castle, Flight of Fire on the outside. 8 of the finest 2-year-old pacing colts in all of harness racing. Fan pacing, Dragon's Lair going for the lead with Pershing Square. Down along the rail, Annihilator racing 3rd. Tucking in 4th, Broadway Express. Marauder 5th. As the race around the turn, racing 6th. Whitson's Wizard. Warm Castle is 7th. Treading the field, Flight of Fire. As the race around the turn, Dragon's Lair up on the outside. Past the quarter and the fastest ever, 26 and 3. Into the stretch, passing a 10 of the first time, racing 2nd, Pershing Square, Annihilator 3rd, Broadway Express 4th, racing 5th, Marauder, Whitson Wizard is 6th, Warm Castle 7th, Flight of Fire trails the field. They're tightened to bunch up, going to the half. Dragon's Lair has the lead, Pershing Square 2nd, Annihilator 3rd, the half, 56 and 3, 2nd quarter and 30 seconds flat. Broadway Express racing 4th, Marauder 5th, Warm Castle the short route at the rail, down the backside, Dragon's Lair. Here comes Annihilator on the move on the outside. Pershing Square 3rd, Broadway Express 4th, Warm Castle 5th, Marauder 6th, 3 quarters, 1:25 and 1, 28 and 3. Dragon's Lair by 2 1/4. Annihilator on the outside. Pershing Square on the outside. Broadway Express less than an 8. It's Dragon's Lair by 2 1/2. Here comes Annihilator and Broadway Express. Dragon's Lair, Annihilator, Dragon's Lair wins the Breeders' Crown. 1:54, 1/5, another world's record.
An excited crowd. You sounded a little excited, Roger. 188,000 career race calls for you. Where does this one rank?
It's in the top 4, and I put Wiggle a Jiggle at number 1, Falcon Sealster 2, Dragon's Lair 3, and Nansemon 4 as far as ranking them. But one thing, to continue with the Billy Houghton story, that night after the Breeders' Crown, they had a big dance and party down at the Holiday Inn. And Billy came right to me. And he says, well, I guess you were right. Dragon's Lair whipped him tonight. And standing beside me at that time was Dick Richardson Jr., who was the trainer driver of Marauder. And after Billy left, I turned to Dick and I says, Dick, I want to thank you for bringing Marauder to race here in the Breeders' Crown as well, because it takes a complete field of horses to make a horse race. He says, well, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to come back next year and I'm going to win the Adios. Marauder upset Annihilator as a 3-year-old and won the Adios for Dick Richardson. So Dick Richardson called the shot the night of the Breeders' Crown for the next year's 3-year-olds.
Amazing. Annihilator only defeated 3 times in his career, one of the all-time great pacers. And so, again, a testament to the crop. I mean, to have colts that were good enough that, if he just wasn't 100% to knock him off. And, all the great ones at one time or another do get beat. So, again, we want to welcome our guests tonight, Roger Houston, Jason Settlemore, Greg Gangle. Great to have them with us. And great to have you joining in and watching tonight as well. Would love to hear from you. Leave your comments and questions with us. And we've got some trivia now to get to. We will draw one winner at random at the end of the show. We've got some trivia questions that we will sprinkle in throughout the night, and all on a Little Brown Jug theme. First one, who is the oldest driver to win a Little Brown Jug title? The oldest driver ever to win a Little Brown Jug. If you think you know the answer, again, leave it in the comments section. I think we have a question to get to, and we might pose this to all 3 gentlemen. And it's a good one. You asked it to Roger, but we'll maybe get all 3 of you to offer your thoughts on this. We'll start with Roger. What horse do you think had the greatest performance in not winning the Jug? That might be a difficult one to answer. Is there one that sticks out as a horse that raced tremendously but fell short on the day?
There was a lot of them, really. They didn't tell me this question ahead of time, so I didn't get a chance to think too much about it.
Well, we can give you some time to think about it. Legal Notice, yeah.
I'm going to say Legal Notice because I mentioned him earlier. I thought he was by far the best horse that day. And the rest of the story on Legal Notice, John Sr. had said he would rather win the Little Brown Jug than go to heaven. Well, Legal Notice won the first division, and I announced on the PA system, I says, John, you're getting awful close. You got one. Well, you got beat in the final, so we know that John's up there in heaven. Legal Notice. I thought he was the best that year.
Yeah, I would agree in watching that replay of that year. Jason, you had your hand up there. It sounded like you maybe had one.
Yeah, the year, maybe Roger could even answer this. This is a trivia question for him, too. Who was the horse that was in the race-off, forced the race-off the year Western Hanover and Fake left? Who was the 3rd horse? Do you remember that?
No, but I'll tell you in a minute.
That's a good one. Maybe one of our viewers will chime in. Okay, well, he had it.
Well, how about who was the driver? So that was probably my, look. I mean, I was standing there with Gene Regal and Terry Holton, and when they came, and we were in the back paddock, and Terry looked over at Gene because when they came past the judges' booth in the infield from where we were standing, Western Hanover's head was by Fake left, and everybody looked at Gene and said, congratulations. And of course, that was the longest photo in the world. And then they hung Fake left, and, you could hear the sigh of the crowd at that point. But, so, and then he come right back the next year. I think it was the next year that he won with the Life Sign, which is actually my favorite Little Brown Jug.
Yeah, that was a great one. Greg, you've had a moment to think about it. Do you recall a horse where you thought, geez, that a little bit of better luck and they might have been the winner today?
Yeah, you know what? In my generation, I don't want to show the age on Jason and Roger.
Hey, Greg, how old are you?
There. I'm 33, Jason.
33.
In my generation, the last couple of years, Lather Up comes to mind. Wasn't the handiest on the half. Everybody knows that, but go out, win his elimination in 49-3, and then in the final, he got pushed to 3/4 and like 121 and change. And obviously the winner that year was Courtly Choice, who obviously one of the greatest jug performances of all time. But the fact that Lather Up did all that work on the front, 3/4 and 21 and change, 21 and 2 or 21 and 3, and still pacing 49 and 3 or 49 and 4. And he didn't even finish second. He actually finished third. But I just thought that was an amazing performance. And obviously, from there he went on to do, even better things as a 4-year-old.
Yeah. So as we mentioned a couple of times, you're of a younger generation than the rest of us, obviously. But when did you get the racing bug, and when did you attend the jug for the first time?
Yeah, good question. So I grew up in just a small town here in southwestern Ontario, about 40 minutes from Western Fair. And my dad, he owned and operated an insurance company and a real estate company, and he always had a couple horses on the side. I didn't really fall in love with the racing end of things. It was more the breeding. So I always followed pedigrees, and before Track It and the USTA and things like that, they had the old Sires and Dams book. And that's kind of, I really enjoyed research and looking up brood mares and sires and this and that. So it wasn't until my early teenage years where I actually enjoyed the race horse part of it, largely because I had no choice. So, I adapted to it, and then, it just kind of grew from there. My first ever Little Brown Jug, I think I was 15 years old or 16 years old. And actually that was one of the race that everybody talked about. I had an older brother that was involved with racing too, and it kind of had that bug. So I was the younger brother following the big brother's footsteps, and all of his buddies were talking about the Little Brown Jug. They didn't really talk about the North America Cup or the Meadowlands Pace. It was all about Little Brown Jug, Little Brown Jug. And a lot of it too was the atmosphere. So that's, and that was the first major stakes event that I went to.
Yeah, and it's a real throwback, the Delaware County Fairgrounds. And what's, I think, interesting is the announcer calls the races there from the center field in the judges' stand. And Jason knows about this. We've got a photo of Roger in his perch, of course, calling there. And we'll get a look at that. So it's kind of a different perspective, right, Jason? You're in there and you've got to follow the action from inside the racetrack and kind of spin around. And we've got a shot of you, I think, the same thing. You're now the official backup there, and I believe that's from the judges' stand calling the action as well. But yeah, it's a lot different, isn't it, than calling a race from, say, the Meadowlands or Tioga back where the grandstand set off the racetrack.
Yeah, no, I've called races at several places, including numerous county fairs in Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and the Little Brown Jug is certainly unique from the Delaware County Fair from calling from the inside of the judges' stand. I would say, though, of all the places that I've called races, that Delaware from the inside of the judges' stand is probably the easiest, just for the simple fact that it puts you closer to the action. And I've always said that those 2 minutes is when it's just me and the horses and drivers for 2 minutes there. It's probably the best time for me, just because that's all I'm focused on at that point in time. The toughest place I ever called a horse race was Colonial Downs, without a doubt. I went down there for a weekend. They had called me to ask me to come down and call some races there, and that was because when the horses turn for home, you have no option but other than to either lean completely out the window and possibly fall to your death, or do it, or watch it from TV, because the only thing you could see at the top of the stretch are just the head numbers, and that's it, and the front angle of the head numbers. So that was probably the toughest place. But calling races in Delaware, Ohio is to me is fun, especially when you get the crowd involved as well, and you hear the crowd coming down the stretch and people yelling and screaming, and you can hear it inside of your headset, and you're hearing it from the front side and the back side because of where you are naturally. So that gets me really fired up. And so what do? We lose Roger?
Yeah, I think we've lost Roger. So Curtis will. Oh, there he is. He's back. All right, welcome back. You haven't missed anything.
To call a race from the Delaware County Fairgrounds from the inside is like I said, it's probably the easiest because it puts you closest to the action. And I don't even use field glasses at Delaware, and I've never used them on a half-mile track. And for those of you that know that I wear glasses or contacts. Of course, I have my contacts in tonight, and but I don't use them on a half-mile track, and it's particularly much easier to call at the Delaware County Fair than it is anywhere else. And that picture of me actually is from downstairs. Roger would be upstairs at this point, and I'm downstairs doing the stuff in between the races.
Okay.
And then, of course, when Roger needs a break, I'll run upstairs and call races.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely a shot. Man, that's a good-looking guy in that picture.
Yeah, it's very easy. I was going to say it's easy to see from the photos, and when someone listens to you call, you can hear the influence of Roger Houston in your race calling.
Sure.
And we've heard you do a good imitation of Roger. Could you give us a little snippet now? We put you on the spot.
Sure, the one that I will do that, but it Roger always gets, his face will turn red completely here when I start into it. But I'll give you a little bit of a snippet that we did that one time we were out there in Delaware, Ohio, after Tell All had won the Little Brown Jug.
Yeah.
If you're going to tell one, you better tell them all. Tell All has won the Little Brown Jug.
You nailed it.
He's more of a ham than I am.
22 and 4.
Look at the timer.
Look at the timer.
Roger's face went red.
Yeah.
That horse he was trying to think of, his name was Crouch.
No,
with
it's
Western
Gamma
Ham.
Ray.
Gamma Ray?
Yeah.
He didn't win.
I don't think
though,
Roger's setting Jason a
All right,
Christmas
he
card
didn't
this
win.
year.
Well, we'll let our viewers perhaps they've got the benefit of Google and good memory, so maybe they
Gamma
can
Ray
chime in.
did win the first division.
Yeah.
And Jason, just wanted to ask you about the influence that Roger's had, and when did you guys first cross paths? And we've got a nice photo of you two doing the Dan.
I got a story on that one.
Together.
I got a
there
great
you are
story.
at the Jug, and of course you've co-hosted the Dan Patch Awards together, so a long history there. It must have been like kind of meeting your idol when you first got a chance to work with Roger.
It certainly was. And Roger, Tom Verne, I think it was Tom Verne, Delaware, Ohio, and it was a year that I was still in middle school. And Tom Verne had asked me to come up and speak with Roger at a school in Delaware, Ohio. And so I went up and I did that with Roger, and we kind of, him and I we've been friends ever since. And he's pushed me along the way, and it was always it's always an honor to be able to sit next to Roger anywhere and work with him, just because of when I was growing up. I mean, that the voice Roger Houston was always the one that I was emulating and trying to and wanting to call the races at Scioto Downs and the Delaware County Fair, and get to call races at the Meadowlands when I won, and Vernon and Tioga. So being Rogers meant quite a bit to me over the years and has done a lot for me, and things that I'll never be able to repay him for. And I know Roger does quite a bit for a lot of people, but there's one person in particularly sitting here right now today that will tell everybody that Roger means the world to me. But that's when we crossed paths, was Delaware, Ohio, the first time. When we both spoke at a school for Tom Verne.
Okay.
We had a thing at the Historical Society last year, and he was there and relived that moment that we spoke at the middle school in front of the 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, I think it was that year or something. But it's the one thing I'm probably the most proud of course, I have to go back to Sam McGee. Of course, I was very proud of him. No question about that. I knew him since he was about 6, 7 years old. But I have touched and been involved with at least 35 young announcers in that 61-year career. And I'm very proud of that. to have been able to help a number of youngsters get started in the business. Some of them weren't so young. They got hooked up with me when they were 30, 35 years old and became announcers with me. Jim Shuley back at the Meadows was one of my backups. Jeff Zedek, uh, Steve Cross was another fine young man that I got to some degree helped him in his career. Scott Ehrlich, there's just so many of them, Jason and everything. One thing about Jason, I sent him to the State Fair of West Virginia one year when he was really young. And the presiding judge, Doc Sam Howe, I will say this, even when I worked for Doc Howe, it was very hard to work for him because he wanted an announcer speaking the entire 3-4 hours that the races were taking place, nonstop announcing. I mean, talk about something all the time. And so I sent Jason down to State Fair of West Virginia for 2 days, and he did real well. He did real well. But Doc says, don't you ever send that young kid back down here again. I've teased Jason about that forever.
You have to pay your dues.
And I'll tell you that Doc Howe and I, Doc Howe and I did not hit it off at all. And it was, I made a mistake, and listen, I get it, and now I realize it as I'm older, but I called him Mr. Howe, and he said I didn't spend 8 years at school to be called to get a medical degree for some young guy to call me Mr. It's Dr. Howdy.
There you go. It's a tough business, right? You have to have a thick skin for sure, but it's all paid off for you. Let's continue our trip down Little Brown Jug memory lane. Certainly in the history of the jug, one of the greatest days, but it also had some controversy around it, was when the only filly ever to win the Little Brown Jug back in '81, Roger, Fan Hanover. Just maybe walk us through that day. There was a look at the great filly and the late Glenn Garnsey.
Fan Hanover just had set I think it was a world's record at the Meadows, and she was one of my favorites of all time as when it comes to fillies and mares. And in fact, as I did a filly and mare pace fantasy call a couple weeks ago, and I had Fan Hanover winning that race with Glenn Garnsey. I think she would have won the jug that year, regardless of the accident that took place. There was an accident in the final heat, and only 3 horses finished the race, but she won. But Glenn always had her in the right spot to win. She one of the horses that would come from off the pace, but occasionally she had to go to the front end and do well. I also have a set of her shoes, and I swear she's had the smallest hoofs I've ever seen on any horse in all of harness racing. They are probably no bigger. The shoe was probably I got to get in the camera, no bigger than that, between maybe 3.5 inches from one side to the other. Just a very small hoof. And I got those shoes mounted. She had a storied caretaker by the name of Adele Short. And when Glenn was a great driver, and I think he would have won regardless of the accident that year. She was just done the best. And what about the owner, Dr. Glenn Brown? A great guy and a great friend over the years, and I was so happy for Doc Brown as well to win that particular jug.
And the biggest race in Canada for 3-year-old filly pacers named after her, held at Mohawk Park, Greg. And you and I had the good fortune of working at Woodbine Entertainment together for years, and here at Western Fair. And maybe just quickly talk about your path, to get to the point of racetrack management, and a really unique path for Canadians, because you went and took the racetrack program in Arizona. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was like, every other kid. I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. So, I applied to a bunch of colleges. I'll be honest, my marks were terrible. University was not in the cards for this guy. So I went to a nearby college, and I got my diploma, my 2-year diploma. But I was like one of a million kids in Canada with a marketing diploma, and say, okay, now what? So I really knew that at that point, I had to be unique and kind of diversify myself. So I loved racing. So I applied for the racetrack management program in Arizona. So I went there, and lo and behold, I'll be honest, I was only there for about 3 or 4 months. Wonderful program. Looking back now, perhaps should have stayed a little bit longer than what I did, because it was a wonderful program, but very pro thoroughbred, and I was all about harness. So I was also working for just the management team as a co-op student in the offices and stuff for the racetrack industry program. So the phone rang one day because they're all in a board meeting, and it was Harold Howe calling from the Harness Edge, just talking about harness racing and things like that. And conversation struck up, and he more or less said, when you coming back home? And I said, actually, in a couple weeks. There's Thanksgiving. So flew back home and met up with him, and the rest is history. I flew back to Arizona. I dropped out of school and all that. Parents weren't too happy about that one. Anyway, Greg, I was 20 years old going to work for Harold, and I started with him November 1st. And on November 2nd, we were in the car going to Harrisburg. And I've never been to Harrisburg before. And right off to see, the likes of John Campbell and Jimmy Takter, and I was starstruck. I didn't know what to think, or, it was just, so much knowledge in one place. And here's this 20-year-old kid, being introduced to everybody. I didn't know what to say or do. It was really incredible. And so I spent 2.5 years there, and the following year, when I was there, was 2008 with Sun Beach Somewhere in Muscle Hill. So, I got a big blast of greatness right off the get-go. And then from there, an opportunity to come up at Mohawk Racetrack in Woodbine, working for WEG. And it's something that I didn't want to pass up. Anytime that you can work for the premier track in Canada, it's hard to say no. I spent 3.5 to 4 years in the marketing department, and then that translated into a TV role. And so I got to learn a couple different, facets of the business. And then I really wanted to get into management to continue to diversify myself and continue to grow and learn. And then an opportunity to come to Western Fair to, work with you and Reg Ash and a great team there. Started off as the assistant manager, and then, moved up to the raceway manager, as yourself took on a different role with our marketing and communications department. So, looking back now, I'm so thrilled to have so many people, as kind of like what Roger said. He helped so many people along the way, like Jason and Steve Cross and a bunch of people, where I'm much the same. Harold Howe was a great mentor for me. I learned so much from him, professionalism and meeting so many different people. Then I went to work with Woodbine, yourself, Mike Hamilton, Ken Middleton, the list goes on, then obviously everybody at Western Fair. So, I was very fortunate enough to be surrounded by wonderful people to get me where I'm at today.
All right. Well, we're going back a little bit before your time again, Greg, unfortunately, us old guys. But this, I know when I was a young teenager, I really got the harness racing bug, hook, line, and sinker. This was a race that I had a VHS tape at the time, and I have replayed this race hundreds of times in my life, as I'm sure most harness racing fans have. The race, it was back in 1984, Falcon Sealster, on a day where, again, Annihilator, he's the star of the show. He's the great Annihilator. He did win the Little Brown Jug that year, but kind of upstaged a little bit, Roger. And set the scene for us. Was Falcon Sealster coming in that day? Were the Connections intent on trying to set a record that day?
Tommy Harmer and Charlie Day wanted to upstage Annihilator. He wasn't, Falcon Sealster wasn't eligible to jug, and they contacted Delaware and wanted to come and go for the world's record. And a little backstory on that, Charlie Day actually felt that every time Roger called Falcon Sealster, he would set a world's record. He came to the Meadows, set a world's record. He come to Delaware, sets a world record, and he sent me out to California to call him going on a mile track, and it was all scheduled for me to call the race in California. And I flew out there, and the announcer there went through the ceiling. He says, "No, Roger's not going to call this race." And Charlie says, "Well, we're scratching Falcon Sealster." And Dick Feinberg says, "Oh, you can't scratch him. We've spent $50,000 promoting this race. You got to do it. We'll have Roger call the horse on TV from the winner's circle, live on TV." And I told Charlie, I says, "Come on, Charlie, we got to go. We'll do it that way." And so no problem. Well, I called the race on TV. He didn't set the world's record, and Charlie went to his grave blaming Dick Feinberg and the announcer out there for not getting the world's record on a mile track. But I talked to Tom Harmer that morning, and Tom told me what fractions he wanted to hit. He, on the first quarter, I believe, was right on. He missed the halftime by 1/5 of a second, and he was 1/5 of a second faster to the 3/4 than Tom had thought. And I'd asked Tommy, I says, "What do you think the mile will be?" And he says, "I have no idea. That's up to Falcon Sealster." And it was a world's record. You can't plan on what you're going to say ahead of time, but harness racing kind of had a thought that a lot of people, they sit on their hands and watch the race, and it wasn't that exciting or anything. And I don't know why I said it, but I used a line past the 3/4 that has it's kind of been my trademark, I guess. I've used it one other time, and it was a world's record mile. But on that day, it was the very first time, and it wasn't planned, and it just came out. And everybody knows if you've never been on your feet, you better stand up now.
Yeah. And Jason will probably attest to the same thing. Go ahead.
Tom Harmer got a cassette recording of this race, and he had, I think, a white Cadillac. He would drive through the barn area at Pompano with that that video cassette as loud as he could so everybody would hear the call.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jason, you're probably the same as me. I think I knew this call verbatim after watching it so many times, but let's relive it again. Here is the call from Roger back in 1980.
Fourth, up on the outside, BJ's Reply fifth, trailing the field, OB's Falcon Eddie, down the backside they go, Falcon Sealster by a length and a half, ground time leader second, past the quarter in a speedy 27 seconds, into the turn, going to the 3/8, racing up the rail third, Skipperdale Marks, Tequila Star fourth, BJ's Reply fifth, trailing the field around the turn. That's OB's Falcon Eddie into the stretch, passing us down the first time. Falcon Sealster and Tom Harmer moving over to the halfway point. They reach the half, 54-3. 27-3, second quarter, racing to the backside, it's Falcon Sealster by a length and a half, racing second, ground time leader to the backside, Skipperdale Marks racing third, on fourth is Tequila Star on the outside, OB's Falcon Eddie fifth, BJ's Reply sixth, what's the 3/4 gonna be? 1:22-4. And Falcon Sealster opens up for Tom Harmer. If you've never been on your feet, you better get up now. It's Falcon Sealster opening up now by 15 lengths, 17, 19. Falcon Sealster and Tom Harmer coming home. Look at the time there. 1:51.
You can hear the crowd. Now, Roger, was the crowd louder than normal when that time flashed up? Yeah.
It really, I hate to say this, but it made the Little Brown Jug take second seat that day, because everybody goes around and if you ask somebody real quick who won the jug that year, they have to think about who won the jug because it was all Falcon Sealster that particular day.
And that time was just so unheard of on a half-mile track for that time. And I think that's what was part of it. Trivia question for everybody here. I was fortunate enough, I didn't realize it at the time, but to watch Falcon Sealster make his first career start. And can you guys take a guess at what track that would have been? I'll give you a clue. Roger called a race.
Can I say where it was?
Sure.
I know where he was broke and trained as a 2-year-old. Was it up there, New Brunswick? In New Brunswick?
Yep.
Yeah.
New Brunswick Downs.
I did the
Raceway.
Monktonian there.
Yep.
One year I did the Monktonian at that one.
Yeah. He was broke and trained by a gentleman who was a professional wrestler, and his wrestling name was the Beast, Yvon Cormier. And I remember seeing him, and at that time, there was no simulcast or anything to follow horses. So the next year, until I heard his name in Delaware, I just didn't even realize where the horse had gotten to, that he had changed hands. And he went on to become a world champion. So great to relive that and go back in time. Time for another trivia question. And again, we want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And again, take your guesses at this. We will draw one winner at random at the end of the show from the correct answers. Wanting to know next, which trainer has won the most Little Brown Jug finals? Leave your answers in the comment section. And again, we will recap all the questions and answers at the end of the show. We have some questions to get to now. The first one coming from Joe Garab, I believe. There it is. Roger, who were your 3 favorite horses of all time?
Jubilee John. It was a 10 and 11-year-old gelding trotter that I drove to 19 wins in a 2-year period in the amateur races. So I've always put him on top. But now the horses people would know, I've got to say Wiggle It Jiggle It, my all-time favorite. The story, night before the jug, I had dinner with George and Montrell, and I came very, very close with them over the years. And Wiggle It Jiggle It, I think, and I'll be very honest, I called him the year that he came back after not racing for a number of years, and I said he's got to make his first start at Delaware. And Montrell and George decided to bring him to Delaware, and it wasn't meant that he would win, but he did finish second. So Wiggle It Jiggle is my all-time favorite. The other one would be Neville Pride. When I was at the time trial in Indianapolis, when he set the world's record with Stanley and such. And I made that statement that day that if I had a second daughter, I was going to call her Neville. And Neville was born in 1983. My wife didn't like me naming my daughter after a horse. And I said, well, what's wrong with Neville? I says, nobody else has that name in the entire world. And she said, well, I have to see her first. And I said, Barb, what do you expect her to look like? So what's that got to do with the name? So Neville Pride and Wiggle It Jiggle It, my 2 favorites.
All right. There you go. Now, Greg, you've got 2 young daughters. Do you ever think about naming them after a famous horse?
No. I'm just gonna go with a hard no on that one.
Not everybody can do that.
Not everybody can do that. Yeah.
Right.
You know, there's no.
All right, we've got another
quick
question. Sure.
Hey,
another question.
You know what my grandson's name is? You know what my grandson's name is?
No.
Tyler B.
Oh, wow.
Tyler B.
There you go.
Another horse.
There you go. You might start a new trend. Kevin McDermott wants to know, and this is something that I've actually thought about. When you call 188,000 races, there ever a time where it wasn't fun for you? Did you ever lose the enthusiasm, or is it still just as enjoyable today?
Never, never. Uh, I've always had somebody, they've always said I call every race like it's a little brown jug. And the reason I call every race after the little brown is because each race that you announce has owners, it has trainers, it has a driver, it has caretakers, it has fans that bet on that horse. And for that particular horse, it might be the closest they ever come to racing in a race like the Little Brown Jug. So why wouldn't you give your all when you announce that race? Because that might be the biggest race for that owner his entire career. And so that's what I've done for 61 years. And I think I was right in doing that. One story I wanted to tell that when Greg mentioned Some Beach Somewhere, I went to Toro one time to speak at their horseman's banquet. You probably know where this story's going. And if you didn't race in the Little Brown Jug, and people asked me about a horse that I said, what? Somebody says, well, what do you think of Some Beach Somewhere? And I says, wait a minute, Some Beach Somewhere? I don't think I've ever heard of him. Did he race in the jug? No, I've never heard of Some Beach Somewhere. And so we went on, and after the dinner was over, guy came up to him and he says, by the way, I own Some Beach Somewhere.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those that I think harness fans still wonder what that day could have been like. Shadow Play, of course, world record performance, and what a matchup that could have been.
That is probably one of my biggest disappointments, is that he didn't, and I mean this, that he didn't come to Delaware and race in the Little Brown Jug, because he was a super horse, make no doubt about it, super horse. And I would have loved to have called a race that he was in, but I never had that opportunity. So that was a big disappointment for me.
Greg can attest to this. Watching the way he won the Confederation Cup here locally that year at Flamborough Downs at 49-2 and did it effortlessly.
Yeah, even I think it was his first or second lifetime start. Well, I think his first start, if I'm not mistaken, was the Battle of Waterloo as a 2-year-old. And then he broke the record even there as a 2-year-old on another half-mile track. So, and then I think when he won the Messenger at Yonkers in the slop over Shadow Play. So, I mean, wonderful horse. And yeah, I remember the hype all year was, the latter half of the season was, why he was not going to the Little Brown Jug and all that, all the content on the websites and things like that when they elected not to go. And they said it very early, if I'm not mistaken. They said it very early in the campaign that they're not going, and they stuck to their guns.
Yeah. Well, they wanted the world's record on a mile track, and they thought to take too much out of him to race on the half-mile track at Delaware. It wasn't that they couldn't get around a half-mile track because he had done it at Flamborough. They wanted the world's record. And my thought on the matter was, Lexington can have the worst weather in the fall meet known to mankind. It can get cold, it can get rainy, and for somebody to skip a race for another race that's 2 weeks down the road, I just thought it was a major mistake that they made in his schedule, but they made the schedule, and I think if he had raced at Delaware with a super mile, and they would have remembered that far more than his mile at the Red Mile, when he came up short, I believe. Not sure what the time was, but he didn't get the world's record at Lexington.
Yeah. Likely the 2 heats as well.
Jason, we asked you to pick your favorite Little Brown Jug, and you went back into the vault to 1993, and you're not alone on this. For a lot of people, this is the one that they remember, and I'm sure Roger would agree, but it's Life Sign. Tell us what it was about this particular jug that enthralled you so much.
It was the performance of the horse. I mean, he was absolutely amazing that day. And it was at Riyadh Presidential Ball, getting personal. I mean, there was a lot of great horses that year, and I'll never forget him being parked essentially every step of the mile, with the exception of 10 steps when John took him back and then brought him right back first over on the outside. And it was just a tremendous race. And Riyadh was on the front end. I'll never forget Roger's call there, you know, and Riyadh's got the lead, and Life Sign backs off, and then he's right back out on the outside. And then the top of the stretch, you got Presidential Ball, who's been sitting in the 2-hole seat, and he gets a little room to come through there, but Life Sign's still charging at him and digging at him. And I'll tell you, not only was it that really, it was the interview with John after the race too. And I mean, this race still to this day, when I see it, I still get cold chills and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. Because it was just an incredible effort by the horse that day. And John says it in the winner's circle. It certainly wasn't the, you know, it was all horse and not him. But, you know, John standing in the winner's circle that day, and here's the winningest driver in the sport of harness racing. And Roger says that, and he says, and he's shaking like a leaf. And I'll never forget that. It was one. Yeah, it was one of the greatest.
He was shaking.
The greatest.
Yeah.
You know, to hear,
and he had,
you know, and you can hear it in
You remember
John's
what?
voice too.
Yeah.
You remember what John said? He says, "That's the worst drive I've ever made in my life."
Yep. I don't think, and I still think that he would probably not disagree with that to this day. But
Well,
that was an incredible effort and an incredible mile to come back for Gene Regal the very next year after getting nosed there by Fake Left, and to win that next year. Because Gene, you know, being from over there in Greenville, Ohio, he, you know, it was a dream of his, that was for certain.
Yeah, and he'd had some bad luck in Little Brown Jugs prior to that, so it was great to see a master horseman finally get his moment. And it was the horse putting on a show that day. He won his first heat elimination by 3 lengths, and wasn't favorite though in the final. He was a slight second choice behind Riyadh, and we'll have a look at the call now. And Roger with the description of that epic 1993 Little Brown Jug final.
Here they come! Facing Life Sign, steps out of the gate on the outside, but Riyadh is speedy from the inside. Presidential Ball racing third, Ready to Rumble is fourth, racing fifth to the backside. Native Born racing sixth, the end of the turn. Captain Fantastic, Riyadh has won the early battle. He leads by a length and a quarter. Presidential Ball second, opening panel in 27 seconds. End of the turn, Riyadh leads, Presidential Ball second, racing third, Ready to Rumble. Backing off now, fourth at the rail, Life Sign, pacing fifth as they race around the turn, Captain Fantastic. As they race into the lane, the leader is Riyadh. Life Sign's first over on the outside from fourth. He's now third and moving up as Riyadh takes him to the half. 56 seconds. Second quarter in 29. Presidential Ball's in the 2-hole trip. Racing next is Ready to Rumble. On the move on the outside, Captain Fantastic is fifth. Racing sixth, getting personal, seventh at the rail. Native Born moving to the outside, down the backside, and Corvo Big to the 3/4. Riyadh leads them by a length. Life Sign on the outside. Presidential Ball's locked in. 3/4, 1:23 and 4, 27 and 4, and Riyadh has the lead. Life Sign second. Presidential Ball's buried at the rail. Ready to Rumble is fourth. 8th of a mile to go. Riyadh with the lead. Life Sign. Presidential Ball. Life Sign's coming on. Riyadh. Life Sign on the outside. Life Sign wins the Little Brown Jug. And Riyadh is denied the Triple Crown as John Campbell waves the whip in the air for victory in 152. World's record. Second heat. World record. for 2 heats by Lifeside.
Incredible, Jason. Still give you chills? Yeah. And again, that final surge, Jason, it's incredible. Where did you wonder, where did the horse summon that little bit extra when he needed it?
And it's really reminiscent of the Wiggle and Jiggle race too, and how he found that little bit of extra right there at the very end, and it just shows you the grit and determination of champions in a horse like Life Sign and a horse like Wiggle and Jiggle, because they just never want to be defeated, and you could just tell it in those types of moments, and to me, that race was probably it is to me the best race ever, just because of the background and the people yelling and screaming, and you could tell the emotion of John coming to the wire and throwing the whip up in the air, and it just it was really one of those moments in harness racing that you would just never forget, and like I said, it's the grit and determination. It really shows the true heart of a champion when they find that extra little bit. And like I said, my second Little Brown Jug favorite is probably, I will say, is Wiggle It Jiggle It, just because of that grit and determination that they actually find there coming to the wire when you think they're beaten, the chips are down, and everything's went the wrong way, but they show that heart and desire of a champion to want to win.
Absolutely. Well said. Our final trivia question tonight, also on a Little Brown Jug theme. Want to know which pacer has the fastest last quarter in Little Brown Jug history? And again, if you think you know the answer, leave a comment, and we will find out if indeed you were correct at the end of the show. We want to take a look at some fun video next. We're going to kind of take a trip down memory lane and look at Roger over the years, his work with the Meadows Racing Network. That was another big part of what you did, and you guys had a lot of fun on there.
I hope you got the one with the hair.
Well, I was going to say we're going to notice that the styles have certainly changed over the years as well, whether it be fashion, whether it be hairstyles. Maybe Roger can walk us through a little bit of this time capsule for us. There it is.
Jerry
There's the hair you spoke of, Kate.
That's Jerry Connors. And my wife actually took a curling iron to my hair every night before the broadcast and pluffed it up. There's Dick Richardson and Marauder.
How much product did you go through in a week back then?
You mean in hairspray and gel and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Quite a bit. Bob Sabbath, he was a publicity director. That was St. Patrick's Day.
This is my favorite.
I did 33 of those things with Delvin Miller. Zivko Kowalczyk, Jerry Arnstein. Oh, we did a lot of things.
I'm sure that brings back memories.
Now this scary. Aaronstein did not know about this, but we had this wrestler show up. Nick Salvi, one of my great co-hosts, Kevin Decker, Trish Shout, Shepard Soulsby, Peter Kleinhans.
All right. Well, we can cut it off. We can cut it off there, Curtis. But yeah, we just kind of wanted to show all the wonderful people that obviously you've worked with at the Meadows over the years and had a lot of fun. But I think the hairstyle, what was happening?
Well, my wife was a beautician, and
okay,
she just did it. And I came to move here to Ohio, of course, and I went to Sports Clips to get my hair cut, and Girl says, well, how you want it cut? And I says, well, I don't know. Do what you think you should do. And she took it all off, and now I'm back to short hair, and I like it.
Well, I think it's, as a young person in the business, you have to have good hair. That's inevitable. We're going to bring up another photo next. Speaking of that, I mean, Greg Gangle knows this all too well. Straight off the beach, maybe Venice Beach, doing a little surfing. I don't know where that was from, but what was going on there, Greg? You were
I
styling
think,
some product back
yeah, I can't remember if that was Cuba or Mexico. I was working for Herald at the time, so I would have been 20 or 21 or 22. And at that point in time, I think we were about a half an hour from going out to the clubs. So that's all I got.
Well,
Oh my God.
Greg was also, you've always been a good one to socialize, and of course that's a big part. It's a big part of the Little Brown Jug, and I think it's a big part of the appeal, isn't it, Greg, for Canadians? You're working here, and it's a nice little getaway. It's not far for us to drive 5-6 hours, and you can go down and let your hair down for 2 or 3 days. No pun intended. But it's really the social atmosphere, right, that I think lures Canadians as much as the racing.
Well, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, go ahead, Roger.
One year, they went through the parking lot at Delaware, Ohio, and counted license plates. That year, over 50% of the automobiles at Delaware for Jug Day were Canadian licenses.
Yep.
There is a major crowd. And I also like to tell the story why Delaware finally went to an all-weather track. I forget what horse it was, but Charlie Juravinsky of Flamborough.
We're running out of time, Roger.
He had a horse in the Jug, and he hired a private jet and brought like 20, 25 people to the Little Brown Jug. They got rained out that day. They had to fly home, and Charlie raised so much, hell about it. Delaware went to an all-weather track the next year. But Charlie kind of responsible for that. But
Speaking of big personalities. But the social aspect of the Jug is incredible. One of the games that Greg actually was very good at was cornhole. Had a lot of luck, but certainly the king of the Canadian
from my
when it came
Facebook page
to cornhole were Curtis McDonald, our very own Curtis McDonald. He's the man behind the scenes tonight. There he is. And certainly no Canadian could rival him at that game. There's our good friend Chris Roberts as well, joining him on this day. But part of the atmosphere, guys, Jason, it's incredible when you're in the backstretch there and all the big RVs and the atmosphere. There's just nothing else like it in the sport.
Is that right behind the log cabin?
Absolutely.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
It sure is.
That's the noisiest bunch of guys I've ran into.
I can't believe I've escaped this with no pictures of me being put up.
Not yet.
Well, Greg, it's your turn. We asked you for a favorite Little Brown Jug memory, and you picked a good one. I remember this year, and what I remember about it was the winner, what he paid. I liked the horse coming into the day, and after the first heat, I really liked him. And he would go on to pay 5-1 in the final, but we'll let you talk about the year 2002.
Yeah, there's a couple reasons why I chose this one, Greg. First of all, it's my first ever Little Brown Jug. I think I was about 15 years old. And it wasn't so much about the race itself as it was that crop of 2002. $1 Million Cam, Mach 3, Art Major, Red River Hanover won the North America Cup. Royal Majesty was in that group. All-American Ingot. Just the list goes on of really, really good horses. And even to this day, I would have a hard time selecting a crop that deep in talent and that much spread out over a given year. as it was that year in 2002. And just the way that Luke Ouellette drove $1 Million Cam in that edition, he had one plan and one plan only, and John Campbell didn't like that plan. We'll see that here in a few moments, but a couple reasons. Like I said, my first ever Little Brown Jug. You talked about the atmosphere and the camaraderie of everybody. 40 to 50,000 people, gathered in one setting, and just the amazing crop. $1 Million Cam was the best that day. Red River Hanover was the best in North America Cup. Then there's Mach 3 and Art Major, Red River Hanover, All-American Ingot, McCardle, the list goes on. So that's the main reason why I selected it.
Yeah, $1 Million Cam. He was considered probably the third or fourth stringer in the Bill Robinson stable that year, but on this day, it was his day. And here's Roger again with the call from back in 2002.
Racing fourth, Art Major is fifth, 3 Olives pacing sixth, Life is a Cabaret seventh, racing eighth, Comestic and trailing the field down the backside, Fancy Smancy. They race over to the quarter, 25 and 4, equaling the fastest quarter in the history of the Little Brown Jug. As they race around the turn, on top of the field, $1 Million Cam, Mach 3, hung on the outside. All-American Ingot is third. Into the stretch, Western Resolve fourth. Tipping to the outside, 3 Olives. Up the inside, Life is a Cabaret. Domestic and trailing the field, Fancy Smancy. The half, 53 and 1, 27 and 2. Second quarter, 5 in. 4 out, around the turn to the 5/8 mark. $1 Million Cam and Luke Ouellette with the lead. Mach 3 on the outside, inside, All-American Ingot starts to look for room for Dave Miller. 3 wide, Western Resolve and Ron Pierce. Up the inside, Life is a Cabaret. Art Major on the outside. 3 quarters, 1, 21 and 3. Round that final turn, $1 Million Cam. All-American Ingot comes to the outside. Up the inside, Life is a Cabaret. Down the stretch they come. $1 Million Cam. Battle for second and third. $1 Million Cam with the lead. Is he going to get home on top? He's the Little Brown Jug winner. $1 Million Cam. 150 and
World's record.
So world record. The fractions that year, Roger, were they records at the time? Had to be one of the fastest opening quarters and halves to that point.
Yeah, it was at that time. It was the fastest first quarter, 25 and 4. I'm not sure about the half, but 53 and 1 was pretty good. That second quarter was in 27 and 2, and kept right on going. 121 and 3 and 150 and 2. But there's a picture that Brad Conrad took, and it's in the press kit for 2002. And I think it was his win in the earlier division, not the final, but $1 Million Cam coming around the turn, Luke laying straight back, and $1 Million Cam had 3 hoofs above the axle coming off the turn. And he was just fluid in motion that day. Perfect.
Yeah. One of the great things about the Little Brown Jug, Greg, is you go into the day, there are storylines, there are horses that everyone expects to do well on the day, and that can all change in a heartbeat. After the first heat, those storylines can change, and it can be a different scenario when you go into that final.
Well, absolutely. Especially a lot of it depends on where you finish in that elimination, that first heat. So, a heavy favorite going in might, finish 4th or 5th and just have a bad trip or get parked or something like that. And you're forced to draw, between the 5 and 6 as an example. So it really favors the inside horses the way that they line up at the final. So that dramatically changes throughout the course of the day after you get those first heats out of the way. And then, look at what happened with Shadow Play with his hoof issue going into the final. So, there's so many things that can happen throughout the day.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Roger a question, and then in a moment, I think we have another question from our viewers. But Roger, you've had the chance to call Little Brown Jugs, Breeders' Crowns, and other major races, obviously. Is there a major race, though, a significant race that you didn't get to call that you would have loved to have called in your career?
Well, like I said, some beach somewhere. I would love to call him somewhere, but no, I've never been one to have a bucket list. And what life has given me, uh, I never went out of my way to get invited someplace or anything like that. When I go to Australia and Finland, Norway, Sweden, Wales, Ireland, those were all requests from people there. So my entire life, I've never looked forward to try something I want to do. I just always took whatever was thrown my way, and I have no regrets whatsoever. I do say, though, I would have loved to have called some beach somewhere once.
Okay. In that same vein, we have another question from one of our viewers. Wants to know, you're semi-retired, obviously, and going to be calling the jug this year. But will you be calling any other races besides the jug, or what's your schedule going to look like?
Well, I don't know what the schedule is. For the last 5 weeks, I've been doing fantasy races, putting 8 horses together and then calling the race and letting people on Facebook choose who's going to win. And we got one coming up tomorrow morning, being, believe it or not, Life Sign. I think Life Sign's in tomorrow. And he is the heaviest favorite we've ever had in these fantasy races. He's now 3-5, believe it or not. But I'll give you a little hint. He's going to get whipped tomorrow in my fantasy race. And Canadians will love that race. And it's at 11 o'clock tomorrow on Facebook on the OHHA.
All right.
I've got, I think it's 8 county fairs in Ohio scheduled this year. If we would get back to racing and they semi-normal or something, I may make a trip to Canada. I've been going up there for the last 3 years and announcing a number of racetracks, and it's just too far down the road to think what that's going to be. And I'm scheduled to go to Ireland once again, August the 15th and 16th for the Vincent Delaney Memorial. And I've decided this year going to Ireland, even if they don't have the race. I don't know what that status is going to be. I think there'll be a race, but if they cancel the entire race, I'm going to Ireland and enjoy myself for 3 or 4 days for an actual vacation. But I'm hoping we'll be racing.
Yeah, and you talked about fantasy races, and guys, we had to go through this past weekend, something different, something that we had never seen to this point in our lives, and that's no Kentucky Derby on the first Saturday in May. Strange. Did you guys have a chance to see the virtual edition of that yesterday, Jason? Maybe ask you that.
No, I didn't watch it. I
Didn't
guess
see it?
one of the biggest things for me is that, yesterday was the strangest, right? I mean, because it's usually our second busiest day of the year outside of the Hambletonian. And, you know, I don't know. Look, this whole thing has me shook right now. I want to get back to normal. I want to get back to normal and do it safely, and make sure people are doing it and doing it safely, and so everybody stays healthy. But at the end of the day, my biggest fear is that as a I don't know how quick we're going to be able to get back, and we're going to try to do it without patrons towards the middle of the month. We've put those requests, like I said at the top of the show, in to race without patrons at the 3 properties that we have. I'm hoping that those will be granted so that we can move forward and try to get some normalcy back. I think we've got a pretty good plan in place at all 3 properties to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing for me, is that I never in my lifetime, I don't think any of us ever thought we would have to deal with something like this. And I'm not sure, how long it's going to be before we get back to normal, but I wanted it to be 4 weeks ago, 2 weeks after the quarantine. So.
Yeah. And Greg, as we know here, this is the time we would be getting very excited for the Camelot Classic. It's always held the last Friday in May. By now, you'd probably know some of the confirmed starters, etc. It's strange territory, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. This, between the month of October when we start up in May are the two busiest months of the year for us, and we always cap it off at the Camelot Classic. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year. So, I mean, like what Jason said, it's hopefully we can get back to some type of normalcy. And you know what, our expectations are not going to be full strength going back. Participants only, no spectators, things like that. But it's so much to digest because, like Jason said about the Kentucky Derby, well, we have a wonderful on track in our simulcast as well on that day. So, and today in Ontario is one of the nicest days we've had so far. So when you get that sunshine on you, you really start to think about the Camelot, and that's just not going to happen. But with that being said, don't want to sound too selfish, because hopefully things can get back in time for the likes of the Hamiltonian and the Little Brown Jug and the Breeders' Crown. So we're doing everything we can right now, but for the greater good of the industry, us as track operators, we're going to do everything that we can. So when we get the green light, we're going to be ready tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, I know you were disappointed we didn't have a picture of you, an old picture, but Curtis
Please.
worked his magic and he was able to find an old classic here for us. Not too embarrassing, but obviously you in your younger days, that's probably a special picture to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a great picture at Sound of Downs in Columbus, Ohio. And actually, there's another picture up there where Roger actually let me put on all his rings, and I had those all on that day as well. But no,
how heavy were they?
It was like, I can't believe he walks around with them. No wonder he's got a bad back.
Jason, how many? Jason, did you must have paid Curtis and Greg not to throw up a worser photo than that, right?
Travis wants to say hi to everybody out there. Stick your head down there. Say hi.
Hey, Travis, how are you? That's great.
He's got a toad here. He's
it's
brought
not a toad. It's a frog.
It's a frog. All right. That's what happens when you're live, right? Kind of like that the other day when the guy was live on CNN or whatever, and he had his sports jacket and his dress shirt on, and the camera actually went down a little bit, and he was sitting there in his underwear.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah. Well, exactly. And it's amazing. We've talked about this with other guests on the show. It's amazing that we can all be sitting in our own homes and doing this. So if there's a bright side, it's forced us to embrace some of this technology, and I think it's something we'll utilize collectively in harness racing, even once we get back to what we call normal. Yeah, definitely good that we've been able to do that. I think we lost Roger again briefly. We'll get him back on the line, and here he is, just in time, Roger, to look back at your personal favorite Little Brown Jug, the one you sent in as your most memorable. Again, 2015. Set the scene for us that day with Wiggle It, Jiggle It.
Now, I'm going to disagree with Jason on this, what he said, Life Sign. Life Sign had a great performance, but for Wiggle It, Jiggle It that day, he had trouble in the first turn. Montrell had to bring him to the outside where he was more nose to nose, stride for stride, toe to toe, with loss for words for 3, 4, 5/8 of a mile. Top of the stretch, David Miller opens up with loss for words. Wiggle It, Jiggle It falls a length and a quarter back coming off the turn, and somehow, some way, Wiggle It, Jiggle It comes back to get him right at the wire. And I hope that you have the audio after the race is over and hear Sam and Dave Bianconi with their comments. I still think this is the greatest horse race in the history of harness racing for the way it unfolded. if you want to disagree, I'll say it's the greatest race on a half-mile track. But it was just a super performance, a great race. Lost for words. Just didn't quite have enough to get there. Wiggle Jiggle, just a super effort coming back in the stretch. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest race that I've ever had the opportunity to call.
Yeah, it was an instant classic, as they say. And you're right.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Jason talked about hearing the emotion from John Campbell when Life Sign won, and you could hear it in Sam McKee's voice. And again, we'll turn it now to the audio of the race call with Roger of this epic Little Brown Jug final.
Off and pacing fast out of the gate on the outside, My Hero Ron. In between horses, Lost for Words. Racing third, Wiggle It Jiggle It. Taking a seat fourth, Art Speed. And the battle's on early on. Early on, though, the leader going to the backside, Lost for Words. Tucking in second as they race over to the first quarter mark. My Hero Ron, Wiggle It Jiggle It third, Art Speed fourth. Rockin' in Heaven outside fifth. Opening quarter, 27 seconds. And here comes Wiggle It Jiggle It. Now third, now second. After the leader, Lost for Words. At the 3/8 mark. Into the lane first time. Lost for Words with the lead. Wiggle It Jiggle It up on the outside second. Nose to nose, stride for stride, toe to toe. Coming to the half. 54-1. 27-1, second panel. Racing third, My Hero Ron. Up on the outside, Art Speed, now fourth. Racing fifth, Yankee Bounty, sixth on the inside. Going to the backside, R.K. Hanover, racing seventh. Rockin' in Heaven. The battle continues to turn it into a war. Lost for Words, Wiggle It Jiggle It at the 3/4. 21-1. 27 seconds, and they're still going at it. Lost for Words, Wiggle It Jiggle It. The battle of the finish around the turn. Lost for Words has the lead and starts to open up. Wiggle It Jiggle It on the outside second. Can anybody catch him from the back? Coming home, Lost for Words, Wiggle It Jiggle It. Coming home, Lost for Words, Wiggle It Jiggle It. The final surge. 149, 3/5.
I do not believe what I just saw. Wiggle It Jiggle It was beaten. He kept on coming and nails Lost for Words in an epic Little Brown Jug. Can you believe this?
What a horse race.
What a race.
Oh my goodness.
That could be the best race, Sam.
This could be the best race ever in harness racing history right here. Wiggle It Jiggle It about stood on his head in the first turn there. Took a bad step.
Roger agrees with that sentiment, and yeah, it is hard to argue when you watch that again. It just had the look of another one of those Little Brown Jug days where on this day, another horse is going to step up and knock off a great horse. And I mean, it looked that way until probably 30 feet from the wire. And he somehow finds more.
And Montrell, you saw after the race, he was raising his hands in the air and yelling and taking the comments of the crowd. And there was another line in this race that I've never used before. This battle was turned into a war. And that's exactly what it was. It was a war between the two real great horses. I even said after the race, Lost for Words was not a loser. He just got beat, and somebody always gets beat in a harness race, and today it was Lost for Words. And right here is where they look at the stride. Those horses are in total stride right there.
Yeah. Yep, and you hit it on the head, and it kind of reminds me of a race, getting back to Some Beach Somewhere, the night he beat Shadow Play in the Messenger. Shadow Play took him right to the wire, and Some Beach Somewhere had to find that little bit extra to go by him, and it was the same here. Lost for Words, I think you put it well, Roger. He in essence went a winning trip, but it just wasn't quite good enough to
Yeah.
hold off the great Wiggle It Jiggle It.
There was one shot in that race where it showed, it kind of zeroed in on Lost for Words, not here, but it was down the backside, and you could just see the power in the stride of Wiggle It Jiggle It. Every time I look at the replay of this race, I notice it. Just a horse that
Yeah. A lot of
he's
fun.
great.
Well, and
Yep.
we'll watch it many more times, I'm sure, over the years. It is a Little Brown Jug classic. Roger, though, we couldn't end the show without talking about another very important part, really, of your career, because you were the gentleman who provided the soundtrack for one of the greatest drivers in the sport of our generation, certainly Dave Pallone. You've been there throughout his career at the Meadows and watched what he's done, which is nothing short of remarkable. He is the leading driver in harness racing history. Just a matter of time before he's going to hit the 20,000 win mark, which is hard to fathom. And, you know, you go back to when he, first of all, surpassed Hervé Filion to become the leading driver in North America, and then eventually the leading driver in the world. And no one was happier for Dave than you. You were there for pretty much the whole thing.
From his very first drive back in 1983. And we've been very close. He's won 19,100 and some races, and I probably called over 18,000 of those wins. And I just think he's an exceptional individual, and a lot of people, he didn't go out and drive in circuit, and he didn't come east and race at the Meadowlands or something like that. Dave Pallone is really a family man, and that's the one thing a lot of people don't realize. But he always, throughout his career, was wanting to be close to his family, and that is the main reason he stayed at the Meadows. And with the way things are going right now, I don't know, make 20,000 or not. He was having a good year this year. He and Mike Wilder were battling it out pretty good, but he's still, 23? I think he's been the winning driver at the Meadows, and I think he's on top by about 8 or 9 this year as it now stands. But great individual, a great friend, and it wasn't hard leaving the Meadows. A lot of people ask me about that. But leaving people like Dave Pallone and Mike Wilder and Tony Hall and the guys that have become good friends over the years, that was the hard part about leaving some place that you'd been 44 years. And I miss those guys every day. And I think overall, probably one of the best driving colonies there is in harness racing when you look at the top 10. A lot of tracks that go 3 or 4 deep in top drivers, but at the Meadows we had, when I was there, at least 10 guys that were just out of this world.
Yeah, a lot of people forget. There was a time Brian Sears would have been a regular there, kind of the number 2
David
guy
Miller.
Annually behind Dave. Yeah, Dave Miller. So,
David Miller.
And it speaks a little bit to how good and how dominant Dave Pallone was as well, because these are guys that have gone on and been Grand Circuit forces.
I think Brian and David would also comment the fact that racing against Dave Pallone day in and day out made them better drivers as well. I'm sure that they learned some things. Guys in their careers, they were going up the ladder before they went east and such. That experience right there at the Meadows, and a lot of it has to do with the Pallone's domination, if you want to call it. But I've always said, as far as Dave is concerned, I think he reads a program better than any driver that I know. Sometimes he'll be dead last when you expect him to be on the front end. He has the ability to change course as the race develops to fit that race. I remember the one Adios he won with several years ago, and Jerry Ernstine was my co-host, and I said, who do you like here? And he said, well, I'm going to take Dave Pallone. He'll find a way to win with Washington, V.C. And he came from off the pace around the final turn and won the race. And Jerry knew it as well as I did. He finds a way to get to the winner's circle, and he's just he makes the right moves.
And no one has won more than Dave Pallone. So that's a great way, I think, to cap off the show, guys. Before we end off, though, we are going to recap the poll question, and we'll find out if our viewers agreed with Roger and who had the greatest Little Brown Jug performance. And yes, indeed, Wiggle It, Jiggle It. 57% of those asked thought his was the most impressive. Life Sign second, and Shadow Play third in the voting. We want to thank you for having your say in our poll question tonight. We're going to recap the trivia questions as well. We'll see how everybody did with these. Who's the oldest driver to win a Little Brown Jug title? Well, it was Frank Irvin in 1965 with the great Brett Hanover, and Frank was 61 years of age and the oldest driver to win. And Roger, before we get to the other two trivia questions, you said you had kind of a sidebar trivia from that same year.
Yeah. Somewhere along the line, I got every Little Brown Jug going back to 1946. I got video, and I don't know why. It was maybe a rainy day or something, or maybe they canceled the races or something. But I started looking at all those, and I wanted to see who the first driver was that wore white pants in the Little Brown Jug. In those days, they were always wearing tan or beige pants with their driving colors. But the first driver to wear white pants in the Little Brown Jug was Jim Dennis, driving Adios Vic, who finished fourth to Brett Hanover that day at Delaware. And Jim Dennis was the first driver to ever wear white pants in the Little Brown Jug. They finally made white pants mandatory, I think, in maybe 1968 or 69. But that's before anybody started wearing them on a regular basis.
There you go. Bonus trivia tonight. Let's go to question number 2, and we'll recap the question and the answer from that. I wanted to know which trainer has won the most Little Brown Jug finals, and the answer, the incomparable Billy Houghton, with 6 Little Brown Jug trophies. And our final trivia question, which pacer had the fastest final quarter in the history of the Little Brown Jug? And it was Shadow Play from his sparkling 2-heat victory back in 2008, and capped it off with a 26-1 final quarter on a day where he was crowned Little Brown Jug champion. So thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight, playing along. Again, we'll draw that winner, and we will announce it on our COSA Facebook page. Hope you can join us again this Wednesday night. We've got a special one-on-one with Woodbine Entertainment CEO Jim Lawson. He'll update what's happening at Woodbine, and certainly some more optimism, I think, in Ontario. And we look forward to having him on board on Wednesday night, 7:30 the start time. Reminder to make sure to stop by the Standardbred Canada website and fill out your fantasy stable for the first ever COSA.
The Central Ontario Standardbred Association,
of the Ontario Standardbred Racing Association. So again, we thank you for joining us here tonight. Big thank you again, Roger Houston, Jason Settlemore, and Greg Gangle. Guys, thank you so much for joining us and taking a couple of hours with us tonight. Stay healthy, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Stay well, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Be there!
COSA, the Central Ontario Standardbred Association, proudly serving Ontario horse people with integrity and accountability. Collaborative, supportive, helping to ensure a vibrant harness racing industry. Lifetime membership is free, and there are many benefits. Become a new member today. COSA, representing the interests of horse people racing at Ontario racetracks. To find out more, visit cosaonline.com.